¿Sí? Ok, podemos empezar. Hola, buen día. Vamos a hablar en inglés. So I will change to English now, indeed. I will not give a long introduction in Spanish. We can speak Spanish afterwards. Good afternoon. Happy to be your moderator of this panel discussion on the national urban policies. My name is Martin Cruzel. I'm the director of the European Urban Knowledge Network, which is a network of European member states that work together on urban issues. We work very closely with quite a few of my panelists also, and some people also in the audience. But I do hope there are some people who are not familiar with national urban policies in this room. National urban policies is an important aspect of our work. I remember that like 2 years ago, we organized an entire week of national urban policies with the OECD and UN Habitat that also produced several reports on national urban policies, and one of our speakers will also talk about that. But let me first introduce the panelists to you, and then I'll give a short introduction to the topic, followed by respective introductions from the panelists and the discussion. And of course, I invite you also a bit further on the discussion and the debate to also raise questions yourself. So if you have questions, raise your hand. I'm sure we have a microphone in the room also, is that correct?
Yes,
Tenemos el micrófono, sí?
Yes.
Okay, muy bien. Okay, so that's all possible indeed. I'd like to introduce first, of course, our host, Ms. Nuria Matredonna, who is Directora General de Agenda Urbana y Arquitectura en el Ministerio de Transportes, Movilidad y Agenda Urbana. It's the only ministry, as far as I know, with the name of the urban agenda in its name. That is quite an interesting title in itself. So welcome, Nuria. Next to me is Karen van Danzig, who is the urban envoy in the Netherlands. We have here to my left Victoria Saganovska, who is the deputy director, if I'm correct, right? At the Ministry of Development, Funds and Regional Policy in Poland. And then we have here to the left Eric Briard, who is deputy director Cities and Urban Cohesion at the French National Agency for Territorial Cohesion, which is the agency responsible for many different aspects of politique de la ville, which is not the same as politique urbaine in France, but that's for let's say, for lovers of more detail. I'm sure that Eric might also say a few words about that. Then, next to Eric, we have Mr. Dietmar Horn, who is the Director General at the Federal Ministry for Housing, Urban Development and Building in Germany. And I'm very happy to introduce also two speakers, two panelists who are not representing a member state. First, Dorte Nielsen, who is the Executive Director of Eurocities. I'm sure that all of you are familiar with Eurocities. It's the organization of larger towns and cities in the wider Europe. It's growing fast, actually, right? And then we have, next to Dorte, we have Paulius Kulikauskas, who is head of the Brussels UN Office of UN Habitat, and more specifically responsible for its connections with Europe and the European institution. That is my short introduction. Started a bit late, but we will surely stop at 5 o'clock. So that is because then, and I'm quite excited about that, we'll leave for a visit also to the world famous Alhambra. That's important as well. But indeed, let's first start our discussion about the national urban policies. The motto of this second Spanish National Urban Forum is From Planning to Action. And that's an interesting topic in itself. I would like indeed to focus also a bit our discussions on actions. And more specifically also to see how can we indeed agree on a set of actions that would also further strengthen national urban policies within the EU framework, given the global challenges that we all face. And there are quite a few of them. I'll come back to that in a second. As you might expect, that national urban policies play a pivotal role in shaping the future of our societies. Our world becomes increasingly urbanized, as you all know, with more and more people migrating worldwide to cities in search of opportunities, and also a safe place to hide from war or just a better way of quality of life. And the way we plan, manage, and develop our urban areas is of paramount importance. The challenges posed by today's society, such as, well, name quite a few of those challenges: housing shortages, environmental degradation, traffic congestion, and social and spatial inequalities, require strategic and coordinated responses, or, as some would put it, a systemic change. National urban policies are key to addressing these issues and unlocking the immense potentials that cities hold. They provide a framework for sustainable and equitable urban development, fostering economic growth, social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and resilience in our urban centers. Or to use the key concepts of the new Leipzig Charter, which is a document adopted under the German presidency, I'm sure that Mr. Dietmar Horn will also mention that. National urban policies provide, or should provide, a framework to strengthen cities in all their dimensions: just, green, and productive, with digitalization as a cross-cutting dimension in support of the other three dimensions of the city. Now, in line with the new urban agenda, which was adopted, as most of you probably know, in 2016 during the Habitat 3 conference in Quito in Ecuador, the new Leipzig Charter formulated a set of principles for good urban policies in support of the common good. And that's an interesting topic in itself. These principles of good urban governance refer to breaking policy silos within integrated approaches to urban challenges. Participation is seen as a co-creation or co-design of policies, along with multi-level governance in all its horizontal and vertical dimensions. The same new Leipzig Charter also stresses the importance of national urban policies. By acknowledging to the new Leipzig Charter, the ministers that agreed with the text of this Leipzig Charter also agreed to enable exchanges of experiences. And here I quote from the new Leipzig Charter: exchange of experiences and knowledge between cities and other stakeholders at regional, national, and transnational and EU levels to strengthen the capacity to implement integrated and sustainable urban development strategies. They also agreed to support the development or reallocation of national or regional funding programs for significant urban challenges and facilitate co-financing the European funds as the development strategies and projects. They agreed also to act as platforms for dialogue between urban and other partners to ensure multi-level governance through different means, including multi-level partnerships. And finally, they agreed also to provide incentives for innovation and experimental projects that address current and future challenges in sustainable urban development. So, national urban policies are well described in this new Leipzig Charter, and we definitely need to talk about that. They are also seen as key to realizing the new urban agenda and the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So the localization of these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, becomes a reality, to ensure that the localization of the SDGs becomes a reality by bridging the gap between global aspirations and local realities. In order to facilitate the transformation of cities into vibrant, resilient, and sustainable hubs of human progress. So, based on these, let's say, more general formulations of the importance of national urban policies, I would like to after a short introduction of each of the panelists about their own national urban policies, and after input also from the city organization, Eurocities, but also, again, going back to the more global framework of the new urban agenda and the SDGs, address some of the questions that you might have seen in the input paper, which would allow us also to have a debate among the panelists. And here I would certainly also like to invite all of you to look into questions like what are the key elements for a successful urban policy, how to achieve these ideas or these principles of good urban governance and to promote an integrated approach, breaking silo thinking at all kinds of different governmental levels. And also, and I think that's a very interesting question as well, how to use the new Leipzig Charter as a framework to further strengthen national urban policies. And of course, we should not forget to look into the needs of the local authorities and to see the specific requirements that they have to address with regards to the national level. In other words, how can the national level specifically support the needs and the policies of local authorities? That being said, I'd like to emphasize that in Europe, urban policy is, as it is called in this EU jargon, not a competence of the European level, but it's really a mandate at the national level. And that also brings us to the question, which I would also like to address, but further on in our debate, I would say, about the unique role and the added value, if you want, of the national level within this whole framework in Europe of multi-level urban policy framework. So this is the quite ambitious program of today. And with that, I would like to give the floor to, well, I would say to our host. How could I do that? Otherwise, Nuria Matredonna, to speak a bit about the Spanish urban agenda. I know this is one, it's within the name of your ministry, but it is also one of the urban agendas which quite directly also targets the Sustainable Development Goals in the Agenda 2030. So please, Nuria Matredonna, say us, I'll give you around 8 minutes to speak about the national urban policy in Spain, please.
Okay, thanks so much for the introduction to the topic of this table, and it's a real honor to share this panel with all of these colleagues today with me. I'd like to thank the audience for their presence, but also especially I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our colleagues from all over Europe that have joined us today for the meeting on urban matters that is going to be held tomorrow as part of the events of the European Council, European Presidency that we're hosting during the whole week in Granada. As you know, we've started yesterday with the Urban Forum, the second Urban Forum, and then following tomorrow the meeting on urban matters, on Thursday the one on architecture, and then finally on Friday our meeting with all the national contact points of New European Bauhaus. So that being said, I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction of what's the context in order to understand why the urban agenda is actually working so well in Spain. As you know, Spain is not about 50 million people inhabitants, more or less, a little bit less, and more than 100% of people do live in urban areas. Still, we have a lot of municipalities that are really, really small with less than 5,000 inhabitants. Spain is divided in 17 autonomous communities, 2 autonomous cities, and that's a total of 8,125 municipalities. This is very interesting to be said because Spain is a really decentralized country. So we are really used to be working with different levels of competencies and levels of governments. So it's very usual to be working along with the regional governments, to be working along with the municipal government. So I think that's very interesting in order to understand our urban agenda. Also, as being a decentralized country, the competencies on urban planning are mostly held by regional governments and municipal governments, and we just, as a national government, we just state the basis of that. So we have the basic regulation on land and stuff, but just the basic regulation. A little bit, one step further. what's our ministry? As you were saying in our introduction, the ministry, what used to be called Fomento, and it was mainly known to be like investing in infrastructures, it became a ministry on transport, mobility, and urban agenda. And that's total like a change of focus, like explaining like in what direction we want to be walking towards. So it's very strategic as a naming, no? I was telling yesterday that names sometimes are very long and like just a little bit too much, but they do really set. And when we put words to what we want to say, it's easier to understand the mission of that organization. So what's our mission, as the directorship of urban agenda and architecture. So we mainly work in normative and regulation devoted to building code, for example, also architecture, basic land and urban planning, energy efficiency, along with the Ministry on ecological transition. And we have also based our activity in key funding programs. As for example, we have the 2% cultural that is funding like investment on heritage preservation, also the urban regeneration plan, and I'd like to emphasize as well the program on public building rehabilitation that has been carried on in the past like few months thanks to the Next Generation funds. Talking about regulation also, I'd like to add that from our ministry, we just approved a few months ago the national law on architecture quality that is kind of like now turning into every policy that we are designing from that moment, and also the first national law on housing that's been approved in our democracy. On the other hand, like trying to understand trying to understand better the urban agenda and its strategy. How are our cities? I think this is very interesting because Mediterranean cities, like the traditional Spanish cities, are very different from other countries. Mediterranean cities are very compact, are usually very diverse, compared to other parts of the world are also very accessible. That doesn't mean that we don't have still work to be done, but compared to other countries, it's still, they can be considered very accessible. They are green, they are productive, they are just, or they tend to be like that. So the Spanish urban agenda, it's pretty aligned and it really drinks from the new urban agenda. It drinks from the Agenda 2030, also from the urban agenda from the EU. And obviously, like it's got the consideration as national policy. And this is very important because it's not compulsory, it's not a regulation, it's not a law, but it's a strategic planning. And sometimes the question is always like, really? Is like, how is it possible that so many municipalities have adopted the new urban, the Spanish urban agenda as something that it's them, no? And this is very interesting because it's not compulsory, it's just a strategic planning. So this may give us also an idea that this is an instrument that was very longed by municipalities. So as I was saying before, strategic, non-regularity, and its character, it's totally aligned with the criteria set in the 2030 agenda. So the idea is that like promoting the Spanish urban agenda, what helps the different municipalities is to set the goals, to reach the goals set by the 2030 agenda from the urban design. So what does our urban agenda seek? It seeks sustainability in urban development policies, looking for more equitable, fair, and sustainable development. It fosters an integrated approach. That's also very interesting because we're not talking about initiatives that are going one in this way, the other one in the other one, but it's an integrated and holistic approach, and it's a working method. And this is also one of the key points of the Spanish urban agenda. It's not only a document to be consulted, but it's a working process that aims to work in a multi-level way. So it's aiming to help and to foster new ways of governance methods of working. How was it created, the urban agenda? It was set throughout a very comprehensive participation process that, and finally with many experts, local and regional authorities, different stakeholders. So all the opinions were considered, and it was it was designed in a collaborative way. And I think that's also one of the key points of the urban agenda. When something is designed through the cooperation of all the agents, it's more easy to have like a better acceptance of the instrument that it's created. So finally, the urban agenda was launched in 2019. And what are its contexts? So the Spanish Urban Agenda contains, first of all, a diagnosis of the urban and rural territories. Obviously, without a diagnosis, it's impossible to design a plan. I think that's something that we all agree in this room. It also contains a strategic framework that it's structured in a decalogue of goals. So we have like these 10 lines of work, this decalogue, and then that's deployed in a total of 30 specific goals with indicative guidelines. Then it also contains a system of indicators. We really need to evaluate what we're doing, so we really need indicators to know if this is working properly or not. Then some fact sheets illustrating how action plans can be developed in order to contextualize the urban agenda. The urban agenda, in the end, is giving you like some tools, but then the success of the agenda is devoted to the way it's implemented, particularly in the context of that municipality as well. And then action plans, an action plan for the national government, because we also, as a public administration, we thought that we really needed also an action plan to develop the urban agenda in the general administration of the national government. So as I was saying before, the strategic framework contains a decalogue of 10 goals. I had all of this like in very nice sheets that I cannot show to you, but I'm happy to share afterwards. So we have a decalogue of 10 goals, and then it's deployed in 219 lines of action. So in the end, it's like a la carte menu that you can really use. So every municipality, when they are developing their local implementation plans, they can really like choose what lines of action they do want to use in order to contextualize the agenda in their own municipality or in their own region. And just to give you like a final hint, in 2021, within the framework of the Next Generation Funds, the ministry launched an open call to fund local administrations' action plans. This was an open call with an investment of 20 million euro. More than 230 applications were submitted from different municipalities, and in the end, 121 proposals were selected and were granted funding. Today, we can say that we have like urban agendas that are pilot projects, that they are considered to have like really extreme quality, that they are really unique and exemplar, and as pilot projects, what they are aiming is to be replicated by other municipalities in the future. They are really very interesting examples that we can learn a lot from them, and the idea is just to transfer the information that we're getting from all of them in order to help the rest of the municipalities to order and to plan strategically their actions to satisfy the goals of the 2030 agenda. So that'll be all.
Yeah, well, it's truly fascinating, I must say. It's really interesting what you say about also the importance of the process to reach such a strategic agenda. And of course, as a ministry, you have the instruments, you have laws, you have funding as the key instruments, of course. Just one short follow-up question, and hopefully also a short answer from your side. You mentioned also this whole system of indicators, and you work also with, let's say, proposals that you invite cities to come up with. Do you also monitor progress made on those indicators as part of your, let's say, your funding policy, in order to measure indeed the impact of the agenda at the local level? How does it work?
Like we still, I mean, the initiative is pretty new still, and many municipalities are like the open call was held in 2022, and they are starting to be working. Some of the agendas, even some of the regional ones, started more or less at the same time as the Spanish one. And for example, yesterday we had, for example, the regional government of the Basque Country, like presenting their evaluation plan for how the agenda has been working in the past 4 years. So I think we are still in an initial moment, but the ones that started already at more or less the same time as the Spanish agenda are already like presenting the evaluation of those indicators.
Okay, interesting. Let's move to another federal country also. With you, Mr. Dietmar Horn, Germany, indeed. You're, in a way, the father of the new Leipzig Charter. And I know that Germany is always very successful in maintaining also the legacy of, first of all, of the original Leipzig Charter, but certainly also of this new Leipzig Charter. Please, I'd like to give you the floor, indeed, to introduce to you the German approach to national urban policy, taking into account, of course, also the importance of all these Bundesländer that you need to deal with. I'll give you around, indeed, also 8 minutes and have a short follow-up question then.
Yes, thank you very much. First, there's the good news and the bad news. The good news, we prepared a really wonderful presentation to explain the German national urban policy. But the bad news, here is no technical support for this PowerPoint presentation. I decided not to read all these slides here for you. Instead, I will make 4 points from this small paper. It's a pity. Yes, but like you mentioned,
well, perhaps we should add that we will, of course, distribute all the PowerPoint presentations that you cannot see today. But they, we have PowerPoints, I think, for Spain, Germany, Poland, also, you and Habitat. So you'll get more of those PowerPoint presentations later. But it's also good. I think the bad news is also good news because we can have a real discussion. Yes, so please go ahead.
More time to discuss those issues. So, Matt, like you just mentioned, the basis of our national urban policy is the new Leipzig Charter. It's a framework, it's a strategic paper with its targets, a green and just and a productive city. A green city means ecologically stable. Productive means economically prosperous, and just, as you know, social equally. And to realize all these goals, it's important to choose an integrated approach. This integrated approach is the topic of the new Leipzig Charter. In Germany, we've chosen a joint initiative. We have 3 levels: the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And these different levels have different needs. And it's important to see these needs and to discuss its needs. That's why we have chosen a joint initiative. And we need a broad process of participation. It's not only the administrative levels. We need the stakeholders of the civil society, of the unions, the science, maybe the churches, all groups of society. And this is a good basic to make a policy for the city in total, not only for some pressure groups. To realize such a broad process, you need a good communication. Do good and talk about it. Clear goals, not only visions and perspectives, but clear goals, clear instruments. And sometimes I ask myself, do the people in the cities the normal people in the cities understand us? Do they understand our discussions, our debates about governances and approaches, place-based approaches, and so on? Do they understand it? We do not make this policy for our own, but for the people. And what do those people want? They don't want to talk about approaches and multi-level governance and multi-layered processes. What they want is quite simple. They want a well-functioning infrastructure. Bus came in time, places, green places, tidy places, schools, good education. So I think we should not talk only about structures and strategic papers and frameworks and so on. That's important, no question. But we have always to remember what do the people want, and we have to ask ourselves, do those people understand us? It's not politics for us, it's politics for them. The third point is we need to have the willingness to question our structures and our funding programs. There's so many change, maybe this time, and old certainties sometimes lose their validity. We must have the courage to question ourselves, and we must have the courage to change some things. And when I say we must have the courage, that leads to the fourth point. It's not only the courage to change things, it's a question of power. And I miss the debate about power. Power is the most important thing in political debates and is the basis of political decisions. In Germany, there's a question, who owns the city? It's a good question. Who owns the city? What interests are taken into account and what interests are not taken into account? Who will pay for? And for whom is the benefit? So I think we should not only discuss about approaches and structures and programs. We should talk about these things, these questions. I was now talking here to you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, it raises two questions immediately. Also thinking about the work that has been done also to establish this new Leipzig Charter, which is not the most difficult document, but I'm sure that indeed the average citizen will not read the new Leipzig Charter. But it has some elements which are of direct importance also to citizens. One is the subtitle, which is a program in itself, the transformative power of cities for the common good. And this is, I think, also what you really mean, and perhaps you can explain that to some extent. The other thing is indeed also this new aspect that was added from the old Leipzig Charter to the new one, and that is the emphasis on not just participation as a form of communication to the public, but really as a form of co-design and co-creation of policies, and that also involves the citizens directly. So my question, looking at these two aspects, my question is actually, how can, with the emphasis on policies for the common good, the new Leipzig Charter also inspire new forms of participation at the city level, taking the citizens, let's say, much more seriously as real stakeholders in drafting their own policies or in shaping their own urban realities.
Yes.
Can you perhaps mention a few
Yes.
examples that you know of in Germany?
Yes, taking the people seriously is quite good. The process of participation, maybe we have to change our processes of participation. Sometimes it seems that those meetings are meetings for people like us, people from the public services, from the administration, the people who have a lot of time, who are able to speak in these terms and to understand all those papers. Do you think that a normal worker that works 8 or 10 hours a day is able to take part in these processes? So we have to open them. We have to enable. We have to enable the people, and maybe that's one of the secrets to go to a good participation. The topic of common good is a central idea. The last years I see more and more privatization. The mobility is private, the water is private, the ground is private. So I think we need a roll back to more common good. And we will only reach this goal of more common good if we participate, if we open our processes for normal people. Not only people like us, people who work 8 or 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I think that's important. That's the key to get further to common good.
Let's also see how this works in other countries, indeed. I'd like to move now to, thank you very much, Dietmar Horn. I'd like to move to Victoria Saganowska. I know that indeed Poland has had several versions already of its national urban policy, right? You just updated your national urban policy. Perhaps it's good if you, indeed, if I give you a couple of minutes to introduce to the audience also what the national urban policy approach to in Poland is to address challenges in Polish cities before we move to another country. Indeed, but Victoria, please take around 8 minutes also to explain the Polish national policy, please.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Spanish colleagues, for the invitation, and Mark also to you. I also have presentation, as you've heard, but I'm glad that you will be able to see it afterwards, and some nice pictures of Polish cities and the whole structure that I will try to bring you right now. So as Marta, as you mentioned, we have the second national urban policy in Poland, which was adopted last year during the World Urban Forum. The first one was dated on 2015. And regarding let's say, the geographical scope of Poland, as you may know, we have almost 38 million of inhabitants, 60% of population living in cities, 16 regions with the capital cities, almost 1,000 cities, municipalities with the cities right, and very polycentric urban structure. That's all about the statistics and data. Regarding to our current national urban policy, it was prepared taking into account, of course, the global and the European context. So the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030, the EU Urban Agenda priorities, the directions from the New Leipzig Charter as well, that are the let's say the international dimension that we really take into account while preparing the document. But also it is worth mentioning the national context that we have. In Poland, the national urban policy is directly indicated in the national law on principles for development policy. And with the year 2025, it will broaden the catalog of the public policies. So in our case, it's the national public policy next to the strategic approach to the midterm strategies of the country development and sectoral strategies as well that should be in line with the public policies. So coming back to what is the national urban policy in our case, first of all, it's non-binding for cities. It's more binding for national government. It was adopted by the Council of the Ministers. It's creating the conditions for cities, bringing the directions of urban development, indicating the principles for good urban development, such as partnership, greening the cities, circular economy, accessible city as well. It also it doesn't have a budget itself. Rather, it's redirecting different financial resources that we have at national level, the national resources, but also the European one. So, for example, the principles for urban development that we indicate in the national urban policy, in some cases, are also the horizontal principles for the national operational programs that we have in Poland. Coming to the case how it was prepared, so we also put a big emphasis on the participation and on the process itself, rather more than the reaching goal of having the document. We prepared it almost 1.5 years it took us to prepare this policy. And from the very beginning, we involved a lot of different environments, for example, experts, NGOs, regions as well, representatives from the cities that were working in different dedicated thematic groups. Over 150 experts working on challenges and proposed solutions for the national urban policy. As we have previous experience from the first national urban policy, where we noticed that there is a need of coordination of different processes at national level. For preparing the second urban policy, we created an intergovernmental team which brings different representatives of different ministries that were also working to prepare commonly the challenges and the solutions for national urban policy, so that it was a very participatory process. We also used the formula of national urban forums, local development forums, different meeting and occasions to discuss it with the wider audience and the proposed solutions. When it comes to the goals, visions that we set in our urban policy. So first of all, we identified 6 main goals, which are very much corresponding to the new Leipzig Charter as well. So we identified the cities that need to be more compact, green, digital, accessible in terms of just city also. Efficient and productive. We linked these goals with the challenges. So we identified 11 challenges at national level that were also prepared first on the basis of some diagnosis of the development of cities in this particular challenge. And what's more important, I think that we also proposed solutions to reach these goals and these challenges. So we have solutions in terms of creating or propose some amendments to the current regulations, also to the financing and more organizational structures or analysis. But I mentioned also this implementation aspect that for us was very important at the stage of preparing this policy and also at the stage of implementing it at a national level. So for that purpose, we use this almost 2-year good cooperation with different sectoral ministries that we have. And we create an executive council that is responsible for implementing the national urban policy, for monitoring the progress in implementing different actions, and also for proposing some kind of new directions for the policy. What is important that within this council we have 2 levels of governance, of working. One is the high level, consisting of the ministers, of course, and the second one is the working group, so that we, the civil servants and other colleagues, are working on a daily basis on those solutions. But we also invite to this executive council the representatives from cities associations, from Polish Cities Association, from Metropolitan Union Association as well, also for rural associations to strengthen, for example, the urban-rural cooperation in these terms as well. And the council adopted the action plan that we created for the urban policy. An action plan is a document which consists of different solutions that we proposed in the policy with the perspective time schedule of the year 2030. And we indicate the responsible parties for the implementation of different actions. We identified around 173 actions. And what's interesting, for example, in our case, from this number, around 32 actions are the ones that our Ministry of Development Policy and Regional Policy is responsible for. So more actions are in charge of different sectoral ministries, and they also indicated the time schedule for reaching that goals, which is also important. We already have the first meeting of the Executive Council, and we are really looking forward for this method of working that provide this silos breaking vision that we have. We also use the National Urban Forum's formula. The 5th one will be organized in December this year, and we'll also use it to discuss with the wider audience the results of the implementation of the document. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Victoria, also to explain how this process worked within the Polish context. You mentioned this executive council, which I think is very interesting. I heard that the national level is represented, all kinds of city organizations. We just talked about power and also about, let's say, average citizens. I mean, are citizens, do they also, I mean, can they also be invited to those executive councils to talk about those, let's say, the policies and progress made also within the framework of the Polish urban agenda? How does that work?
We don't have the citizens associations, for example, in the Executive Council. However, these cities associations that we have within the Executive Council They are let's say, the voice of the municipalities and of the citizens that are representing the interest as well. We also have the academia representatives from the Institute of Region and Urban Areas in Poland, but it's not only focusing on working within the Executive Council, but also bringing outside what we achieved and on what we are concentrating. Yeah. So we use this formula of different meetings, like national urban forums, for example, to also communicate and present the, let's say, national approach and directions that are implemented and goals we achieved to present it to wider audience and also consult these goals.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this idea of the national urban forums, of which this one indeed is one example in Spain. If I'm not mistaken, we have it in the Netherlands, we have it in Germany with the Bundeskonferenz. Well, Poland, obviously, Spain. What about France, Eric? Do you also have a kind of a national urban forum in your country? How does that work?
A certain form of
a form of
a certain form. Thank you, Mark.
Yes.
First of all, I would like to thank you for your invitation to this event and to have the opportunity to discuss beyond what is implemented in our countries. I will mainly talk about the French urban policy for priority districts. Why this? Because we have a certain history on that subject. It's been 40 years ago. It's been 40 years now, maybe more now. But we started this urban policy for priority districts. And already it had all the germs and all we are talking about, this sort of comprehensive way of considering the problems of cities and the solutions we wanted to bring.
Perhaps you should explain what the priority districts are in France.
Yeah, I'm about to do.
Oh, you're about to do that. Sorry, I'm too impatient. Okay, go ahead.
This national urban policy is based on on statistical aspects and characterization of poverty, which defines a geography of priority districts for actions. You were talking in your introduction about planning to actions. And precisely the point is to define within the whole French geography and the whole urban French geography the priority districts, and we use statistical means and we use way to characterize this poverty, this urban poverty, because urban poverty has a specificity within the larger and the wider problem of poverty in itself. It represents 1,500 priority districts today in France, with 5.4 million inhabitants, which represents 8% of the French population. So you see, it's of course, it doesn't deal with the whole majority of the population, but with a real concentrated part of the population within cities. The feature of this policy is the political mobilization, which means for us multi-governance policy, and which means interministerial policy, which deals with many state departments and all our local actors and all our local authorities. Dietmar talked about Germany with only, if I remember well, local,
state
and federal. As far as we are concerned, we've got municipal, intermunicipality level, what we call department, region, state, and we are thinking about creating a sixth one. No, sorry, it's a joke. But we have five level of intervention. So the question of coordination, the question of multi-governance. We have a certain experiment on that subject. I don't know if it's a good experiment, but to a certain extent, we know what we mean by that. And this idea is really to tackle poverty, to improve living conditions, to improve employment, to improve the level of education as well, and to enhance the national sectoral policies in these peculiar districts that we identify. Depraved areas, you were talking about this point also, Mart, in your introduction, face systemic problems with social, economical difficulties, and that's what we are trying to target with this multi-partnership approach, what we call a city contract. A city contract aims, designed to improve the situation of these priority districts. And we are precisely working on a new generation of these city contracts, which will start next year and end in 2030. It is a question of cross-cuttings and interministerial kind of intervention, as I told you. And also, we have our own budgetary resources. This policy, above all, aims to strengthen and adapt the mobilization of all sectoral policies within the states, within the local authorities, within their groupings. It constitutes an approach to the territorialization, we would say, of the deployment of public policies. And it is also a partnership-based and a contractual policy. Urban policy is conducted jointly by the state, by the local authorities, by their groupings, and by all what we can call the ecosystem of the real local ecosystem, with local associations, with the inhabitants, through the participation of these inhabitants, and I think we will talk about this very crucial point later. And it involves any partners, finally, whose skill and resources are likely to improve the situation of the priority neighborhood and its inhabitants. And this is what we try to formalize through this city contract. And maybe to add a little conclusion to this short presentation, once again, I go back to your sentence, Mart. You were talking about the question of from planning to actions. And I just wanted to, with the experiment we have, I just want to add something. From planning to actions through processes. And the key point, maybe, today, is the question of processes. And I think it is also what meant Dietmar when you were talking about power and the way to use it in order to transform cities. I think when we talk about processes, it's all about the method to enhance cooperation between all the various actors. It deals with the question of the participation of inhabitants and the ways and means to make it really effective and not making it a sort of communication or marketing kind of political motto. It deals also with the question of how to have a real efficient multi-level governance. And it deals also with the introduction of the method that exists on urban and social design, which can really help us to focus on the needs of the inhabitants, on the ways and means that we can really bring all together, bring along, in order to build a better city. And I think talking this way deals with what we try to achieve through the new Leipzig Charter, and as far as we are directly concerned, with the just dimension of city.
Yeah, interesting, Eric. I know that in France, talking about participation and co-creation of policies, which is a bit of the ideal also of new approaches to urban policy, as also described in the new Leipzig Charter. I know that in France you have this idea of the Conseil de Citoyens, citizen councils, if I would translate that. That's a very direct way to give also a voice to the citizens, right? Can you perhaps explain briefly how that works in France?
Yes, in fact, we created the citizens' councils through the law we made in 2014 on priority districts, and we wrote an article in this law saying, in every neighborhood, there should be a citizens' council composed both with citizens, of course, ordinary citizens, and also representative of associations and civil society representative. So in 1,500 priority districts, we have a national a citizens' council, and this citizens' council is a place where things can be discussed between the citizens, then can be expressed to the local authorities, to the French state through its local implementation, and which can be really used as a tool for the mobilization of all the means, all the national policies we intend to use in this priority districts. For instance, as far as housing is concerned, the councils of citizens can be a way of discussing what could be done as far as the building policy is concerned, which part of the district should be renovated, which part of this district should be destroyed because it's, and which part should be renewed, and with which direction we have to lead for this renewal. The point is that we made this. It worked quite well during the very start of the city contract. Let's say the 3-4 first years of the contract, and then the participation decreased. And then, some inhabitants also moved away from the district, moved to another part of town, and finally, this mandatory thing we created by law has been slowly replaced or completed with more spontaneous ways of expressing the needs of inhabitants. For instance, there's a way which is called district tables, which comes directly from Quebec, which is a method that was experimented in Quebec and that was transplanted in France, which is more spontaneous, where you don't have any election kind of matters and not any kind of designation by appointment by the public bodies. So it is something that is really renewing, and for the new generation of contract we are preparing now, we will open more ways. We will say, okay, if you want to make Citizens' Council and to continue with the Citizens' Council process, let's do it. But you can also go on other ways and means in order to promote and adapt these participation ways to each district. And I think this point is really central. We should decide on the ways of participation to closer to the ground.
And here we clearly see that at the national level, you create the conditions for participation at the local level, right?
That's it.
Okay, let's move to, well, also my country. Let's be honest about that. The Netherlands, indeed. Karen, you are the one and only urban envoy, the only urban envoy that I think a country has, right? There are no colleagues of you in any of the other countries?
Well, I'm actually one of a kind.
You're one of a kind.
So in that sense, I'm also, I'm called the Dutch Urban Envoy for the people that don't know what that means. So a very long time. I was also a little bit the urban envoy for the whole of Europe, meaning that the whole sustainable urban development movement, I was trying to move that forward. Actually, it's going quite well. In that sense, I think there's a lot of attention for cities and for urban movement. So my new mandate, which started last year, till 2027, is actually more focused on Dutch interests. So that's to complement the movement. So my role is actually an interesting one because we're talking about multi-levelness and about cooperation, but actually in my person, I can represent urban interest and I can represent the national government. So this is quite an interesting. Nice. Yeah. This is an interesting role, which means that I have to actually make my story work for both sides. So, and where it doesn't, you can just say, okay, one party thinks like this and one party thinks like this.
Does it lead to any conflicts from time to time?
Yes, I think in the Netherlands we have some conflicts on financial situations for Europe. We might think a little bit differently nationally than in cities, but I think that's in many countries a similar point. But maybe, just to start off, I will say a little bit of facts and figures just to give you an idea of the Netherlands. It's a very small country. I think I'm the smallest of the whole panel, pretty much.
For sure.
We're also very densely populated, and I think whenever somebody says that, it means people, but actually we have a lot of animals as well. We have a very, very high density amount of animals in the Netherlands, but our population is growing. And in that sense, our population is growing on the people side and not so much on the animal side. So that's maybe very important. Well, in the Netherlands, it's also very urban. So 80% of the people live in cities. And this ecosystem, I think, like Poland has said as well, it's very polycentric. We have a very similar idea. We have many different cities and not so much, one big metropolitan area. And in that sense, just some figures, I think we are also a decentralized state. We have a national government. We have 12 provinces. We have 342, I looked it up, municipalities. Actually, they are reducing really fast because they're getting more and more tasks from the national government. So they're fusing towards less municipalities. And we have 21 water boards, which is for us very important because we are below sea level, a lot of us. And we have 2 metropolitan areas. And on top of that, we have many functional areas. And they're not legitimate, I think, like democratic legitimate like my neighbor in France. But they are more from a policy approach, like for public safety, or they're from mobility, or they're a housing region, or they're more an economic region with an economic board. So we have a lot of, more independent forms of regional cooperation. And I think for us, it's very important. We have elections on the 22nd of November. I know Poland had their election not so long ago, and we're still looking forward to the results here. And in our sense, we're having, and I think one of the most interesting things in the Netherlands is that the social economic differences are rising, and I think that's something that cities have to deal with, and they actually also have a big role, I think, to be able to bring people together. But this is also in the Netherlands. We have and actually there's more and more new parties in the Netherlands. We have a massive amount of parties in the Netherlands, and some very new ones. A lot of the old faces, politicians in the Netherlands, they have stopped. So it's going to be a very interesting election also, with a lot of new faces and a lot of parties. Well, just to come back to urban policy, I think the national government creates frameworks and preconditions. And then we have a very long tradition, I think, coming from the water boards and from water in this close cooperation. I think there's many names for it. I mean, multi-level governance is one of them, but we also have like the Dutch diamond or the polder model. I mean, so I think for us it was quite logical to try and introduce this multi-level aspect in Europe in 2016 during our presidency with the urban agenda. And sometimes we forget, but also the national government is also a big employer and is also a big procurement office. We are able to actually change things because we are procuring a lot of things, like cities as well, but so does the national government. Just on the national urban policy, we have no urban policy. So that's an interesting one. We have not an explicit urban policy. We have a centralized national framework, and within that, within different sectors, within our generic policy, we have place-based policy as well. And how that works is actually we have regional agendas, we have programs. I think a program that's a lot like the one from France, and then we call it Program for Livability and Safety. We only have 20 districts. I mean, we're just starting, so we have to learn from France and I think also from Germany. But we have 20 districts to start with that are in real trouble in the Netherlands. And I think also deal making is something the Netherlands is increasingly using. Housing deals, regio deals. We have $1 billion to spend on regio deals, and we have city deals. And the interesting thing is, you talked about urban forums. In the Netherlands, we have the Day of the City and the Night of the City, because we have a lot of young people which want to have a Night of the City as well, the night before. And it attracts, I think, 1,500 people in one day. So that's that's the interest in cities, I think, in the Netherlands. And just a little bit on the law side, I mean, I'm not going to say too much, but we have a planning act and we have a national strategy, and this is going to be actually renewed in 2024. And this aligns a lot with the Leipzig Charter, and it focuses actually on agriculture and nature, it focuses on climate neutrality and circular, and it focuses a whole chapter on strong cities, regions, and villages. So that's coming up. And I think one of the most important things for us is actually the cost of living crisis and the housing crisis. I think we haven't mentioned it here, but I think that's just the thing that in the Netherlands, and I think in a lot of countries, and also in your EU cities, have this issue. It's quantity. I think we have to build 1 million new houses. It's also quality, the quality of the housing, but also the renovation of the housing. And it's also the mismatch. I mean, there is more need for smaller units of housing. I mean, people are splitting up more. There are more elderly that are living alone. So we have a different type of need in the housing side. And to do this, we also need more infrastructure. We need more education. We need places for leisure and living and green. And the Netherlands is small, and we don't have much space. And because of that, I think our new strategy would be we are only allowing multiple functions available on land use. For example, you have, a distribution center. We have a lot of them in the south. And they are only allowed to exist if they have like solar panels on top. So there's not going to be a possibility to have one function. In the Netherlands, you'll have to have more than one function because we don't have the space. And another, I think, important one that really works for the Netherlands is water and soil. So we don't want to build in areas that will probably be underwater in the future. So, or on the coast, or so water and soil will be very leading aspect. And the Netherlands has been very much focused. I mean, I think a lot of the political signals we're getting back from the Netherlands is that we've been investing too much on the west, on the urban side. So more political, there is a very strong focus on the rest of the Netherlands coming, which means that also the investment strategy will have to be for all of the Netherlands, all the regions, also the border areas. And this is when the provinces will start working on their 12 urbanization strategies. And I guess regarding sustainability, this is very much entwined with our urban policy. And just an interesting fact, I mean, the Netherlands exceeds its footprint on the 12th of April every year. So I think we have a lot of work to do in the Netherlands. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Karen. You said we don't have a national urban policy,
Nope.
but at the same time, indeed, you raise many issues where the national government actually has quite an important role also to play. You also connected to one of your last statements to deal with these spatial inequalities, which also have become quite political, because if you look at the map, and this is the same in other countries like France and I think all the countries that we have here around the table, basically, I mean, also indeed to Germany and Poland, you see that the more remote areas tend to vote more towards the right-wing popular parties, or in the Netherlands we have also a
farmers movement.
Yes,
yeah?
We have a farmers citizen movement indeed, which is also putting quite some pressure on the government. So, I mean, these are challenges that need to be dealt with also at the national level, of course. So we have a form of an indirect national or urban program, perhaps, that also works through decentralized deals with cities and with regions, while targeting at the same time also some of the more general urban issues, of course. So in that sense, it's not a formalized national urban policy, but it's a sort of a distributed form of a national urban policy. Is that correct? Indeed. Then, Dorte and Paulius, you have been listening all the time. We have heard now so many explanations of these national policies. It's also time to go back to the city level now, Dorte, with you. Do we really need national urban policies? What is the added value from Eurocity's perspective of the national policies, actually? How do you see that?
Yes, thanks, Mart, and thanks to the Spanish presidency for organizing this event. It's great to have a little bit more time to discuss, in addition to what the DGUM meetings gives us time for. Without sort of answering your question directly, Mart, I wanted just to say that sort of in Eurocities, we work with, we have a membership association. It's 210 European cities. It's the largest cities in Europe that are members. And we work then on a level of granularity with our members in terms of implementation of all sorts of different policies, whether it's recycling of textile, whether it's air quality, employment policies, reception integration of refugees and things. So the spectrum is very wide, and our urban agenda is very broad. And the boundaries for what is an urban policy is also very broad. It really is all activities that the city is engaged with, delivering services towards its citizens, and then that sort of collaboration, city diplomacy agenda, where cities collaborate together for a stronger voice at European level. And it was so interesting to listen to these presentations of the national urban agendas and policies. And I couldn't help reflect sort of up until when Karen was saying a little bit about sort of, yes, of course, there are differences between what cities want and what national governments want, because I was sort of curious to hear that it didn't come out more, because I have to say that in our conversations with cities and the discussions that cities have between them, and the challenges that there are on cities, it very rarely comes up sort of, it's okay, we have a national urban policy, we know the national government has our back, it's going to be okay. It very rarely comes up. On the contrary, there is a lot of sort of cities talking about we like more support from our national government, we like to find ways of working better with our national government. It comes up in many of our working strands. I think what is important from the cities, I mean, there are many aspects, of course. I think some of the levers of change that the national urban policies can focus on, maybe already are to some extent. I think they focus on the capacities and capabilities of city administrations, on resources, and then on governance aspect. And the governance aspect, there's been a lot of discussion around it here. I think that sort of capacities and capabilities is something that's coming up the agenda, and it's probably already happening a lot, that conversation, okay, what's the capacity of our cities to tackle the challenges that there are in the cities? Are there enough resources? Are there technical? Are there enough hands on board as well to tackle those challenges? I think the issues that the cities are dealing with in terms of becoming climate neutral within the next 10, 20 years, the sooner the better. Social inequality, security issues, refugees integration, energy transition. The issues are quite complex. We see more and more interest. There's also a demand from our membership of much more in-depth capacity building than we've had sort of demand for previously. So skills building in the city administration to be able to deal with these sort of quite complex issues. There is also, so one thing is sort of capacity building, another thing is then also how many hands do you have on deck to deal with the issues. And LEC Cities, so London School of Economics, have published some really interesting initial results comparing capacities at local level in city administrations across Europe, which I thought was very interesting. And so, for example, if we look at sort of budgets per capita and people in city administrations per 1,000 inhabitants in cities, there are huge differences. So in terms of budget, for example, North and West have almost more than 3 times as much budget than Eastern European cities have, for example. And similarly, in terms of people working in city administration per capita, it's also the difference is similar. And it's worth taking that European-wide perspective also at this level, I think, because when we look at the challenges in terms of inequalities and climate, for example, we need all of Europe and all of local Europe to be very performant to be able to deliver on those challenges. Yeah. So that's on capacity and capabilities and sort of more attention to that sort of skills building. No capacity, no transition for the just and green and digital transformation. Another aspect is sort of resources and financial, particularly sort of financial resources to then element the policies that needs to be implemented. I mean, these are sort of big infrastructure investment that is needed. We know from the cities that are part of the mission for 100 climate neutral cities that an estimate is that 85% of those investment coming forward to transform into a climate neutral city, 85% of those costs needs to be covered by private investments. And there I mean, it's worth having the reflection on then, okay, who ends up owning the city then, as it was already raised? And some of the cities, even very experienced mayors, are just saying to us, we frankly have no idea how to do this. Yeah. So that's how that's going to work. I think, okay, it's still early days, but the time is pressing. We've also seen, I mean, we have stayed very close with the UK cities, and the city of Birmingham declared itself bankrupt the other week. Which is sort of a signal also in terms of the stretch of the local budgets. Now, this is a very specific clause in UK law that makes this possible. I don't think it's possible in other member states.
So a clear plea indeed for more capacitating cities, more funding, more investment in skills and capacities.
And just on the funding side of it, if I may add one short comment.
There's one more.
There is the sort of one aspect is sort of investing into short-term projects, testing, innovating and stuff. But there's also the long-term investment. And Karen mentioned the affordable housing issue. And there is an investment gap of 57 billion per year in Europe in affordable housing in this sector. And there we have some issues around long-term investment. What is it that allows cities to invest in the longer term in their infrastructure, in their social infrastructures as well? And then we have some EU regulations, Stability and Growth Pact, that is complicated for that. And the last point is governance, but I don't think I need to elaborate more on it. We know cities would like to work better with their national governments, and it's very interesting to hear all the points raised there on that.
Yes, well. Let's move to our last panelists, and then I would really like also to open up the debate for discussions until 5 o'clock. We still have 20 more minutes to go. Paulius Kulikauskas, I mean, UN Habitat and the OECD, you are carrying out a program on national urban policies worldwide. The reports are available on the UN Habitat website, as we know. Within the context of the new urban agenda, there was a very strong argument also in favor of national urban policies. Also in a context, of course, outside of Europe. How do you see, because you are the European liaison officer in a way for UN Habitat at the EU level, how do you see the importance of national urban policies within this wider global context? I mean, what is the added value in that sense of having a strong national policy framework? Although we do see that sometimes these frameworks have different shapes, but we do have one or another form of a national policy. I think the OECD also regards the Netherlands as having also a national urban policy, despite the fact that you might see this a bit differently, Karen.
We call it implicit. I mean,
it's an implicit national urban policy indeed. Yes, Paulius. So I mean, yeah, I would like to give you the floor also for a while to bring us back also to the global level and talk about the way in which national policies can also contribute to the global goals that we see and the global challenges that we also face.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, please allow me to thank to the Kingdom of Spain for inviting us during this presidency, as it used to be a tradition to participate in the Urban Development Group meetings, but also in other dimensions. Mart, global level does not exist. Let's face the fact that we have, 5 countries on this panel, which are all developed European countries, which have, if you look from many other points in the world, which have sort of very developed economies, established infrastructures, and so on and so forth. I mean, I could continue forever. And yet there are major differences. And one of the countries doesn't even have a formal urban policy, but seems to be doing rather well without it and addressing the issues. So, you know, what we are facing in this humongous diversity, and this diversity is not just in 5 or 6 or 7 regions saying Africa is like that, Latin America is like that, Asia Pacific is like that, or Caribbean is like that. I mean, but there is also huge intra-regional diversity. And very often, you see, we have a second, urban policy. I mean, some countries would probably have a continuous 40 years working on urban policies. We are often confronting countries and governments which are asking the question, I mean, should we have urban policy and how does it work? And in a country that is urbanizing very fast, unlike a European country which has sort of settled, it is sometimes difficult to bring across to people who go to international conferences and all kinds of meetings and hear this thing about, decentralization is an answer to everything and it's all about empowering the mayors. They say, look here, we are dealing with 2 distinct scales and levels here. One, of course, is the intra-urban governance and what people speak about, clean environment, basic services, poverty issues, adequate housing, mobility, and whatnot. But at the same time, every country must deal with the issue of territorial governance, which is the urban-rural continuum, the system of cities, towns, villages, other human settlements, what you call in Europe smart specialization. And any policy, formalized or not, must deal with these 2 levels. The country as a territory, and the role of the human settlements there, urban, rural, and whatnot, and also what happens inside the cities, and how a national government creates a sort of enabling environment. Also for countries that develop or want to develop rapidly, also it is important to understand that, they have a vision of how the country is developing, where the country is going, and that they are still undergoing the structural transformation. if you want in simplified terms, moving from maybe agrarian to industrial society. So unless this policy of urban, be that territorial urbanization or intra-urban, is very firmly embedded in their vision of where the country is going and how this urban aspect influences their structural transformation, they are not getting anywhere. Second, I mean, okay, some of you may dislike it, speaking about the whole of government approach, but I mean, the political environment in many developing countries is so fierce competition of different levels that unless they start looking across different sectors of economy and governance through different levels and looking at different territorial scales, it is impossible to conceive what goals have to be there. And then, of course, the usual triad of of course you want to increase the quality of life for all, but unless you can somehow underpin better productivity of economy, it's simply not going to happen. And at the same time, you need to safeguard the environment. I don't want to go into details. And this nexus is already complex enough. But okay, we are dealing simply with a very granular, specific environment, which is often so different from Europe. Matthew mentioned this work that we have done with the OECD on looking at different countries. You can look at the reports. There's a report which is 170 pages, I think, and if you don't want to read 170 pages, there's a synthesis report which is easily accessible and could give you some idea of what is happening. We looked at approximately 70 countries around the world, Europe included, and tried to extract these useful commonalities and say, what if there is a global trend, I mean, where this would be going? And of course, I mean, majority of countries, we are being UN, always look to Agenda 2030, SDGs and everything. They want to look at more than one SDG 11, which is making cities, sustainable, safe, and whatnot, but they're trying to look at, in different countries also at different other SDGs when they are considering their national urban policy. Now, if you ask them and say, okay, what does a successful national urban policy do? Then the answers would be, most of them would say, well, that must define strategic, long-term, shared vision, must integrate sectoral policies, territorial perspective, urban-rural connectivity, engagement of subnational government and stakeholders. We are still speaking sort of two-thirds, I mean, develop coordination mechanisms, develop implementation mechanisms, rely on urban scale data. This is exactly as the Director General from Germany said, you hear the same narrative. You hear the same narrative all the time. As you read an old textbook, people are speaking about the same because you get answers to the questions you are asking. Huh? Right, so of course, I mean, now you say, okay, how do you coordinate? If you want to have an urban policy, how do you coordinate across these different sectors of government? You can imagine, I mean, a developing country, Ministry of Defense, most important, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education. Say, surprisingly, out of 69 countries, I think 64 have formal multi-sectoral platforms. In one way or another, and the Deputy Prime Minister would not. Some of them have also bilateral between several sectors or two sectors saying, okay, I mean, we work urban, but we also work with Ministry of Water, whatnot. They have also informal mechanisms, about a third, which I think is important to note. So if to answer that question, say, okay, from a global perspective, in this report, I mean, the conclusions that our colleagues came to were that, okay, we have 4 big points. Yes, aligning policies among and across the levels of government is very important. Working together with stakeholders is very important. Increasing implementation capacity is very important. And measuring urban enabling environment for cities. I mean, there's more granularity there. So doesn't it sound to you that I'm making a summary of what has been said on this panel?
Exactly, yeah.
Different directors general, urban envoy, Euro cities have mentioned all these things. So you might ask a question, is the world beyond Europe really so different? I assure you it is, because we also asked the question, saying, what are the challenges of implementation? Well, okay. You set up a good policy, you are guided by the United Nations or whomever, they come and tell you how to do your things. I mean, not enough people, not enough money, policy silos, institutional fragmentation, lack of technical expertise, lack of political will. I don't want to offend anyone, but I mean, somehow I am missing in this layout, which is also very, very familiar from what we heard. No one seems to have asked themselves the question, maybe we are departing from wrong premises when we are starting to plan our urban policy? Maybe our policy cannot be easily implemented because it is not adequate. And then, I mean, let me finish then saying, when you look at the reality of many different countries, of course, I mean, probably the most problematic, as always has been, many countries in Africa, due to conflict, due to poverty, due to many other things. But if I had to mention three things, I would mention the following. I think the most important prerequisite for anyone's urban policy in the developing world to succeed is to make it relevant to goals which go beyond urban and even beyond structural challenges, and have it firmly integrated in national development strategy and policy. Not as a separate document somewhere in a corner of a ministry responsible for housing, which is normally one of the weakest ministries in the government, but to have it in the broad context. Second is one must be realistic about resources available for implementing any national urban policies. Because, I mean, there is a gap. I know there is a gap. You go and someone has calculated that in the world, the infrastructure gap is $30 trillion. So we are now assuming, please don't misunderstand me, that we need to build in the Democratic Republic of Congo infrastructure like Germany has today. This is how we calculate the gap, no? Mm-hmm. The question is, who can afford, I'm not speaking capital costs, running, maintaining this infrastructure, educating people. I mean, this calculation of gap is not that meaningful as it sometimes seems. So one needs to be realistic. Say, this is what I have today. This will probably not grow 30 times within the next 5 years. So what does one do? One looks for synergies. Like, I'm not doing this for this one particular purpose. I'm trying to look with those scarce resources what multiple things I can achieve. And of course, I can't go away from this. But if there is no political commitment,
it stops. Yeah.
To implement the policies that have been created, I mean, nothing will help. Relevance will not help. Realism about resources will not help. So that is a call, and we always call for the governments with who we are talking. Say, please be serious about it. It's not about creating a piece of paper. If you are not committed to it, please don't do it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, in order to do so, first we need also people to speak to power and to make sure that these policies are indeed realistic, are taken seriously, right? People. I mean, the audience is also a representation of the people. If we ask the same questions, we get the same answers. It's more or less what Paulius also said. Do you have any other questions that have not been raised so far? This is your moment to raise your hands, and there is someone who will also bring you a microphone. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question to this wonderful panel in all its diversity? Yeah, what happens? Oh, there is. I just wanted to make a remark, because this is also what's happening sometimes in participation processes, of course. But okay, you need to enable that indeed. But I'm glad if you can briefly. I happen to know who you are, but if you can briefly say who you are, where you're from, and then ask your question, please.
I'm Ingrid Gojevic, and I'm from the Ministry of Physical Planning, Construction and State Assets of the Republic of Croatia. Just a short question for France. You were speaking about citizens' council. Is it some voluntary organization, or it goes together with local elections and has limited number of members or participants, and does it reflect the local elections, actually, different parties represented in the Citizens' Council, or the other way? Actually, we are having Citizens' Council, and they reflect the situation in the neighborhood, in this election unit, and it's not always the happy combination of people taking part in those citizens' councils.
Okay. It doesn't have anything to do with the local elections, and there are no parties or various kind of interests represented in this council. These councils are appointed with two kinds of members that are coming from associations that are involved in the daily life of the district concerned. And for the other part, the people are, in French we say tirage au sort. It's
chosen randomly.
Yeah, that's it. So the idea is to have a voluntary participation, but with a hazardful way of designation and of appointment. So it doesn't have anything to do with representative elections or representative system. It has to do with a way to reflect more the image of the district and of the people living in this district. It doesn't have any kind of relationship with the idea of citizenship in sense of simply because there are people living in these districts that doesn't have the national or the European nationality. So these people can vote at the election and cannot be elected. So you see, it's a really separate way of appointing people.
I see there is one question over here. Ingrid already gives the microphone.
Yeah, hello.
Also, please, briefly say who you are, where you're from.
Good afternoon, my name is Jan. I'm from the Czech Ministry for Regional Development, where I only just recently took over the Department of Regional and Housing Policy. And I want to thank all of the panelists for a lot of inspiring examples and ideas. But what honestly interested me the most is the reducing number of municipalities in the Netherlands.
Big topic in your country, right?
Because the grand number in the Czech Republic, which is a bit smaller than the Netherlands, is 6,248. We have 6,248 municipalities, which is crazy, and the number is not decreasing. It's very, very slowly but increasing. And so I want to ask if you had, before it started, this reduction, because it seems only natural that this should happen, but we have strong, say, political unwill to do that. So if you have any ideas of what we should do, or who we can send over there to get inspired.
Okay. Yeah, for me, it's okay to say something about this because it's quite political. I mean, also in Parliament, let's put it this way, it's called amalgamation. So when two municipalities fuse, it's called amalgate. That's the word that's in English. Actually, I was responsible partially for this before I became urban envoy. In the Netherlands, it's not a purpose on its own. We didn't want to make less municipalities. That was not a purpose. It is a natural, it occurred naturally because the decentralization gave provinces, but also municipalities, more tasks. And a lot of these municipalities decided they could not do them on their own. So they started working together, either around centrum, we call them like centralized municipalities that are stronger, which the other municipalities will look toward them for administrative help. Sometimes they share tasks. So we had a lot of these things going on in the Netherlands. And then sometimes, I mean, some municipalities just said, you know, this is not working. So we really would like to try to get these municipalities, amalgamated, like fused. And this was like a natural process. And I think the last 10 years, it went really fast. I think we went, I don't know the numbers anymore really clearly, but I know we went from 1,200 to, I think, what would I say, 340 or something in about 10, 20 years. So it went really fast. And even in the period that I was responsible, I think I did, 15 in 1 year. So it was like, you know, it went really fast. But it's really political because it's something that the municipalities themselves have to want. It's not something from national government. It's only the national government helping the municipalities achieve this, because there's a lot of processes that have to be combined, and it actually has to be, in the Netherlands, it's a law, because every municipality is stated in an annex of a law. So if you want to change this, because you have a new name, everything, new priorities, new region or new area, you have to change the law. And the parliament, the national parliament in the Netherlands, is not very, is quite critical of this movement, which is, also interesting politically. So
it's a wonderful discussion. We can continue this. This is a full debate in itself.
Yeah, but I mean, in that sense, now it's slowed down a little bit because there's no more adding of tasks. So I think it's now a status quo. But we have a lot of countries coming by for the Ministry of Interior, actually, with questions about how this worked. What did you do? What did you not do? You know, how can you involve the citizens of these municipalities? You know, so yeah. So I guess you're welcome at the ministry that I'm also in. So.
Another interesting example, often mentioned, is Denmark, of course, but it was a different approach. It was more top-down oriented, although they gave them the municipalities some time to amalgate, indeed. And if they would not succeed, then the national government would do it instead. That was a different approach. Perhaps, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? I don't see anything else. There's one or not?
Questions that have not been asked?
Yes, because Eduardo, I think we need to stop around now, right? Yeah, it's unfortunate now that the questions are coming. Okay.
No questions.
Yes.
Well, if we don't have time, we think can also continue that tomorrow. I just wanted to ask also my colleague, so Anton de Bommena, I'm representative of Belgium for the DGUM. Just wanted to also ask about on my colleagues also what their impressions is about the role of the national urban policies regarding this interconnection between European matters and more local matters, because that has been a bit missing in the conversation. And I have the feeling that the national urban policies have this role of relaying the concerns of local authorities and also relaying the global and more global dimensions and challenges that we face. In the sense that a lot of challenges and global challenges that we face have to be tackled on the local and on the city level. For example, if we think about the migration aspect, for example, which has been taking a lot of efforts at the European level, and cities are, of course, the first confronted to these kind of challenges, or on environmental matters, for example. And I feel that sometimes national urban policies are a bit missing the urgency that should be there that should be present, so that cities can fully contribute to those challenges and fully have this answer on global matters that we actually are very much on the upfront of the European discussions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antoine. I think that's a very important question indeed. Perhaps I can use that as a closing statement from everyone, actually, because I think it's one of the key questions. I addressed it in the introduction that you perhaps missed, but indeed it's about, Paulius mentioned that national urban policy should be relevant. But what we see is that also within the multi-level governance framework in Europe, we see that indeed the European level is, let's say, working more directly also with cities, and that raises also questions about the relevance indeed of the national level. I don't need to mention to Eurocities and many others also, books that became particularly popular, Benjamin Barber, of course, If Mayors Rule the World, that also raised questions about, do we actually need the national level? So indeed, if we can start with you, Nuria, and then all the others this way, and then have a final reflections also from Eurocities and UN Habitat. Very short, let's say 30 seconds, 1 minute statements about what is the absolute relevance of the national urban policies given that framework. And that will be then also the closure of our panel discussion. Let's start with you, please.
So I think the challenges right now are major, and the only way to face them with certain success is to establish these national urban policies that are really strategic and take into account participation.
Okay, so set the strategic framework for cooperation at the national level. Okay, thank you. Victoria, in Poland.
I think from our perspective, taking into account also this European dimension, is important, good cooperation at national level, citizens' engagement in co-creation of the urban policies as well, and also cooperation not only at local and national level, but also engaging different parties, for example, from private sector, from academia, from NGOs, so that all those challenges and goals that we set will find a way to have a real impact and effect on local level.
Okay. For Germany, Dietmar Horn?
2 points in 1 minute. First, I totally agree to your statement, Antoine. Before I was working in the Ministry of Urban Development, Housing and Building. I was working in the Ministry of Nature Protection, Climate Change and Environmental Protection. And there the policy between the different levels were totally linked. 90% of the national law in environmental policy is determined by European law. And it is totally different to the urban development policy. It's not enough time to explain all the things, but I think this is one of the reasons, maybe the main reason, of the missing link between the European policy and the national or local policies. There's missing a link. I totally agree to your statement. The second point, Mart, before this session, you sent us a paper. And in this paper were 4 questions. And as I remember, the 4th question was, what are the needs, the main needs of the local authorities? Yeah. And I want to say 2 or 3 sentences to this question, because I think it's a very, very important question. I think in Germany, maybe in other countries too, the local authorities must have more room to act. the proceedings we determine from the national law, maybe from the European law, are very long, are too long. The programs are complicated. I know I have good contacts to several mayors and local authorities in Germany, and they tell me it's all complicated. It's not easy to understand these programs and these projects. No, we don't join in. That's too much, and I think we have to simplify these programs, and we have to give those local authorities more room, maybe more trust to act. We should not regulate every detail from the national level.
Perfect. Thank you so much. For France.
Simply, and it will be quite the same as the previous speakers. Of course, the role of the national level is to facilitate the access to the European programs. I think everybody agrees about that. I think the role of the national level is also to provide a stability of the rules, the funds, and the fiscal policies to allow foreseeability of local authorities in implementation of their strategies and to avoid the stop and go. I think it's something that is really critical if we want the local authorities to invest in the long term. We have to provide the stability of rules on these matters. We have also to provide at a national level a one-stop shop for the national intervention, which means a single contact person or a structure identified to handle with the needs of the local authorities. And last, we have to support local authorities in their projects by supporting them through engineering and expertise. And that's what we are doing as far as the National Agency for Social Cohesion and Territorial Cohesion is concerned.
Okay, thank you so much, Eric. Karen, for the Netherlands.
Yeah, I wanted to answer the question in a little bit different way, in the sense that, in our sense, I think the European, the national, and the local is quite intertwined. We did a big research on the Europeanization of the Netherlands, which we're also looking toward maybe doing broader within Europe. But in that, I mean, in the sense, 70% of EU law lands in cities, lands in municipalities. And in this research, 42% of municipalities said, only 42% said they could execute European law. And that is very low. So in that sense, if EU is important, how do we involve the local government more in this EU policy making, which very often goes through member states? And we see an increase in EU legislation anywhere, in the green, in the digital, in the strategic autonomy, post-crisis period. And from the Netherlands, we always say, I think we need regulations to be more territorial considerate. They should be more flexible, so all the execution can be done more on the ground. They should take account also of more demographic realities. And then in a lot of things have been said about what do local authorities need from national government. A lot of them have been said by my neighbors here, France and Germany, for example. But I wanted to add actually the European component. So what do local governments or municipalities need from national government on the European level? And I think they need partnership. I think local authorities know very well what are the practical implications of European law. And this makes them very important also for national law policymakers, because they can give concrete examples, like a living lab. They are a sort of living lab. They can give concrete examples of what works and what does not work integrally in their city. And we as national government should make more use of this. And also, I think the involvement of this national local cooperation would lead to better regulation, or smart regulation, I would say. And I think in the Netherlands we are making an extra step, and we're actually also involving the local government in joint advocacy toward the EU and also towards the new Commission. So we're actually stepping up ahead of that. So I think that would be my conclusion.
Thank you. Now, Dorothy,
Yeah.
I mean, if I summarize a bit what I just heard, it's the role of the national governments is to create the fair conditions for everyone to participate, to set a strategy to enable participation at all kinds of different levels, to combat bureaucracy and red tape, and to allow for experiments, especially for cities. This must be music to your ears.
Yes, what's not to like?
Funding,
Yeah.
capacity.
No, so I think so. Obviously, yes, the national frame is incredibly important. The national policies are very important. I mean, Benjamin Barber, he had a very good catchphrase. It's interesting, but I don't really. It's not something that we in Eurocities is advocating for, and the mayors we're working with are also not sort of actively trying to get rid of the national government or the national urban policies. I think what would be really useful would be to overcome that ambiguity there is about sort of EU level competences in the urban space and just say, okay, I mean, we're going to have to work together, all of us, and find the space to do that and realize that sometimes it's actually a little bit faster if the EU works together with the cities, the member states around the table as well. But some things need to go very fast, like when there is a refugee situation from Ukraine and things, the national governments, I mean, it's a little bit complicated.
Yeah,
So increase agility and overcome this ambiguity around how do we work together and how can cities work directly with the EU. And I think it's also useful to turn around that question in terms of what do local level need, what do cities need from the national level. It's useful also to turn around and say, okay, what is it? I think Karen touched upon it as well. What is the national level need from the cities and how to get it? Okay, yes, so then maybe we need stronger cities and then we're back on the resources and capacity building, yeah. Because there are some national policies that depend, the implementation of those, as for the EU policies, depend crucially on the ability of the cities to take action.
Okay, Paulus, you had a play for relevant and realistic policies. How realistic does this all sound to you?
Yeah, you know, countries are so diverse in terms they arrange all this thing on different levels. European Union is even more complex with this additional level. And I can't forget in this context, you all know Jan Olbrycht, who is a member of European Parliament and the president of the Urban Intergroup there, and who was a mayor and then a president of the region. And we were once discussing it, and he said, this is not that much about clearly dividing the competences to different levels, that you are doing this, you are doing that, you have that funding. Ultimately, he said, this is all about working together. Whatever system you have, you can only succeed if the European, national, regional, local levels are working together. And I think, I mean, I would want to repeat this, not because I want to put Jan behind me and say, I mean, this is, or in front of me to defend, but I think this is really one of the most, if not the most important things to keep in mind.
Okay, wonderful. I think that's a perfect closure. In the end, it's also human work, and we really need to work together. We also need to relax from time to time, indeed, and I think this is the moment now to close this session. I would like to thank all the panelists and all of you who stayed so long with us. And thank you very much. Thanks also to the technicians for facilitating. Gracias a ustedes para la técnica. Thank you very much.
Just to let please all the attendants to the meeting tomorrow, to the DGUM, please stay here in this room. The rest of the participants, please go towards the auditorium so we can have the closing of this second urban forum. So thanks a lot.
Gracias.